So, good evening, everybody. We're going to call the Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission meeting together and to order. First order of business is that the microphones are not working tonight. So everybody's going to be asked to speak in your outside voice, or in my case, in your lawyer's voice. So if everybody can just learn to speak kind of loudly this evening, hopefully the microphone for the TV cameras will pick all of the volume and stuff. So we're going to call the meeting to order, and we begin with the roll call vote.
Yep. Member Jerk.
Here.
Member Liebold is not here. Member McGuire.
Here.
Member Minor.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
And Chair Bergman.
Here.
All right, we have
Okay. So then we have the non-agenda items. We ask if there's anybody here to speak to us on non-agenda items. And not seeing anyone, I think we can move from that. And from there we can begin our historic preservation seminar. We want to approve the minutes. Okay. Excuse me. We have to have a consideration of the minutes. So has everybody seen the minutes?
Recording in progress.
Okay. Any changes, any objections, any changes? No? Can I have a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? No? So we have adopted the minutes. Now we get to the historic preservation stuff. So I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. It has been taking us a long time to put all of this together, and so I'm very pleased and happy that we have this many people showing up. We are going to have a number of speakers speak to us tonight about the various aspects of tax incentives for historic preservation in Lake Bluff. And so I thought, just by way of background, it might be fun to point out that landmarking and preservation began in the United States in the 1850s with the preservation of Mount Vernon by the ladies of Mount Vernon. It then progressed over time and became generally a privately funded process. Then in 1966, the federal government passed the National Historic Preservation Act and charged the National Park Service with creating a methodology for national registration of properties and buildings. In Lake Bluff, and from that we have one historic district in Lake Bluff, the Uptown Commercial District, which comprises this building and some of the other old buildings in Lake Bluff. In 2001, Lake Bluff passed its local preservation ordinance, and in 2005, it recognized its first local landmark at 210 East Center. And since that time, Lake Bluff HPC has worked to adopt an incentives-based preservation program so that we can incentivize homeowners to landmark their house. And the program tonight seeks to outline some of those state and federal tax incentives that are there, and also very carefully outline the Lake Bluff incentives that we've put together. So Claire Gable here, our assistant and village person, is going to outline the Lake Bluff incentives. Carol Dyson is our state representative. She is attending by Zoom and is in Springfield. She'll attend by Zoom, and she's going to take us through the tax freeze process. And then sort of at the tail of that, Jeff McGuire and his wife are going to talk about their voyage through the tax freeze process. And then Jean Sylvester from Benjamin Consultants is going to talk about the actual historic process. So that's sort of what we're doing this evening. We're hoping this is going to be a nice casual meeting. There's water, there's cookies, so please, if you want to get up and move around, that's fine. We think this program is going to last about an hour or so, and then we're hoping to generate questions from the audience and some discussions. So with that, I will ask Clara if she will give her presentation.
Yes. So if you want to follow me along here. So Paul kind of gave an overview already, but basically This is the Historic Preservation Commission, and their job is to assist the village board in making decisions regarding the preservation, protection of historic structures and sites in town, and to educate village residents on the importance of historic preservation. So a local landmark or a protected feature, both of those are used within our codes and on our websites, things like that. They are an entire building, structure, landscape, or a part of it that has been designated a historic landmark by a village ordinance, and that's after coming to the HPC for an initial review, and they are recognized because of their special historic, visual, aesthetic, cultural, or architectural significance. And so the process for locally landmarking a property is, is an application. After the application is received, the request is brought to the HPC. There's a public hearing, and there are certain requirements with that related to public notice. And then from there, it's brought to the village board with a recommendation by the HPC. And then at that point, the village board would approve that designation, and the property would become landmarked. And just one thing to note is once landmarked, any exterior appearance changes requiring a building permit would then require HPC advisory review. I just wanted everyone to know that it's not a scary process, and as long as it's in line with the existing structure and the reasons why that structure was initially landmarked, then those are typically approved without any issue. And so the first incentive program to talk about is one that was just recently adopted in 2022, and it's a grant for 50% of village property tax up to $2,000 per year. And when you get your tax bill, there are some items that will specifically say the village of Lake Bluff. The only one that's not included in that would be the library portion, but the rest would be eligible for that 50% grant. And this is available for up to 8 years, and it is non-deferrable. So what the applicant does is they submit an application every year before October 15th. It's a really simple application where you just fill out one page and submit it to us with your tax receipt so that we can see how much was paid and you get reimbursed. And just some rules with that: it has to be the primary residence at the protected feature, it has to maintain landmark status, and then comply with any property maintenance codes. And then another one that was recently, sorry about that, it keeps jumping slides on me, was recently passed was the building permit fee waiver. It used to be a lesser amount at, I believe, 25%, but the village has since adopted this fee waiver for 100% of building permit fees are waived for protected features. There are a few exceptions to that, but generally it covers most building permits. You can see the exceptions there. They're kind of things that would be outside of typical permits, like demolition permits, for instance. You wouldn't get 100% fee waiver for. These are, I think, pretty self-explanatory, but happy to answer questions later about that if you have any. And then another one was the 10% floor area ratio bonus. So floor area ratio is something that's in our zoning code, and it takes all of the floor area of the building, first floor, second floor, and then some other items as well that are more specific. Some of the older properties in town are on smaller lots and sometimes have a problem meeting our floor area requirements, and sometimes the different boards will hear variations for these properties. So this is an incentive, just saying that basically there's a one-time floor area bonus for these properties of up to 10%. And that doesn't apply for properties that already exceed 110%, but it is helpful for certain properties. And then the last one is kind of similar to that one, but it's for all variations. Basically, the PCZBA and the village board are allowed to now take the protected features designation into account for special consideration for variations. So taking into the account the historic nature of the property and kind of some things that come with that, as I mentioned, maybe smaller lot sizes, FARs, the floor area ratios that are larger than currently allowed, things like that. There actually have been a few properties since this was codified, because before it was something that kind of happened, but it wasn't put into our code that this was something that was allowed. Since this was codified, we have had multiple properties that have received variations that are landmarked properties in town. So this is something that does have weight with our boards. And that is our portion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for outlining the Lake Bluff incentives. Before we move on, we're going to have Carol Dyson come on board in just a second here. But before we move on, I want to recognize Steve Krause in our audience this evening. He was the former chair, sat in where I am sitting, and was one of the moving forces in bringing these incentives to Lake Bluff and helping us turn the Lake Bluff Preservation Ordinance into an incentives-based commission, so that we can actually help drive the financial viability of preserving houses in Lake Bluff. So I wanted to give a shout out to him. Now we're going to say hello to Carol Dyson, who is attending via Zoom down in Springfield. And Carol, thank you for being here this evening. Carol Dyson is the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. She's the Preservation Architect and Architecture Historian who's worked for the State Historic Preservation Office for over 30 years on projects ranging from Wrigley Field, Buckminster Fuller's Dome Houses in Carbondale. She is currently a Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and manages the tax incentive programs. Previously, Carol worked as a preservation architect for the federal government in Washington, D.C. on projects including the old Executive Office Building and the West Wing of the White House. Carol also enjoys teaching part-time historic preservation graduate program at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago for over 15 years. So I'd like to welcome Carol. And Carol, I hope you're able to see us on your part of this. And would you please tell us about the historic tax fees program?
Sure. Hold on, let me make sure I don't have an echo here.
I'm afraid we're going to have a lot of echoes this evening. You're in kind of a gloomy room, so I apologize for that.
No, yeah, I do have an echo. Hold on just 1 second. Let me get rid of that somehow. Let's see if this is doing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nope, that's still echoing, I think. Let me go to computer speaker.
It's just the
And I'm sorry I didn't hear what someone was just saying. We'll get there, don't worry.
yeah, it's still ongoing.
I'm sorry I'm not there in person. Can
Okay.
you hear me now?
technical difficulties. If anyone needs to move closer.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't think it's echoing, is.
Oh, you know what, she probably.
Great, okay. Now, Claire, do you have the sorry.
Yeah, I have the PowerPoint up. Are you able to see that?
I can, but it'd be easier if I could advance it myself.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so I think I'm screen sharing. Is that correct? Okay,
Yes,
I'm not sure
yours.
that's yours or mine.
Your screen
Can you
sharing.
see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so is it on the first slide now?
It's on the title slide now.
Okay, so slide one. Is there an echo or am I just hearing you?
It's slight, but we can hear you.
I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get rid of the echo. That's really irritating. You hear an echo now? Yep, I hear it. You probably do too, correct?
It seems fine on this end.
Yeah, it's not bad, Carol.
Okay, all right, I'll plunge ahead then. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I would like to have been, but it's been an extremely busy fall in our office. So let me begin our presentation here. And I work for the State Historic Preservation Office in Springfield. And I work in the Financial Incentive section, the Architecture and Financial Incentive section. We have a number of programs at the State Historic Preservation Office. We manage the National Register of Historic Places for the National Park Service. We also have some federal incentives that are for income-producing buildings. And then we have the Certified Local Government Program, that program can help local commissions and provide, grants and things like that to certified local governments that are doing preservation programs. And we have our regulatory review as well. And then we have our archaeologists in our office too. So we have a full complement of staff, and we do a lot of projects, thousands of projects through our regulatory section actually each year. I want to talk about the property tax freeze program, which is for homeowners. It's a homeowner program. And just to begin, the benefit to an owner is that if you meet certain criteria, which I'll explain, you can have your property tax assessment frozen for 8 years at the pre-rehab level. Then for 4 years, the assessment will step up in gradual increments from at that point. And by the 11th year, you have 11 years of reduced property taxes, because normally if you do a substantial rehabilitation, your property may jump up at least the next time it goes through a reassessment. It also protects you from property values increasing as well. So you have 11 years of reduced taxes. I'll talk a little bit more how that all is applied. There's no cost to apply for the program, and there's no obligation to the process. Let me just ask one more time, can you hear me okay? And is the echo too bad?
No, we're hearing you just fine and with not too much echo.
Okay, great.
So
So,
you're doing good.
Let me go to the next slide. So the property tax assessment freeze, it's not a tax abatement. Property taxes are still paid, but they're based on the pre-construction assessed value. The freeze begins at the end of the project and when your application process is complete, and the freeze would disappear if the property is sold, and then the assessment would jump to its current market rate. It's not a tax freeze either. It's an assessment freeze. So it's freezing what your taxes are based on, but the current local tax rates will still apply. It's a program that's only for owner-occupied residences. So the tax freeze, you have 8 years of frozen assessed value, and then that gradual 4-year step up afterwards. It doesn't immediately after the 8 years jump to the full assessment. You have a 4-year stepping up, so you can kind of get used to whatever your current value will be then. And at the 12th year, it'll be at current market value. So here's an example, and just because it's nice to even round numbers, I said, well, if the assessor's market value before the rehab was $400,000. And so years 1 through 8, that $400,000 value would be what would be frozen for 8 years. In the 9th year, if the current value would be $500,000 without the freeze, the assessor looks at that and they take the $500,000 current value, they subtract what you've been frozen at, which in this example would be $400,000. You have a $100,000 difference between the two. That difference is divided in quarters, and each year for the next 4 years, another quarter of that difference is added on. So if you were frozen at 400, but your current value is 500, it would step up in year 9 to 425, year 10, 450, year 11, 475. By year 12, it would be that 500,000 current value. Now, the property tax assessment freeze, we really like this program because we've seen it do really good things. It benefits the owners and the community. It removes any perceived disincentive to investment in a property that the idea of your property taxes going up might discourage. It rewards owner-occupants for sensitively reinvesting in their homes and reinvigorating them too. It strengthens neighborhoods and the housing stock. And the reuse of the historic buildings is something that is always sustainable and good urban planning. It encourages protection of historic structures as well through designation. So here's an example. We have properties that are on the freeze all over the state. Most of them, however, I would say are in the Chicago metropolitan greater area. And we have quite a few properties on the North Shore that have been able to take advantage of the program. But we have properties go back to 1870, like this house in Edwardsville, all the way up to properties that are mid-century modern. For example, this house in Glen Ellen, which was built in 1957. So there are 4 criteria that qualify you for the freeze. The first one is significance. It has to be a certified historic building, and I'll explain each of these in a little bit. But it has to be owner-occupied and your principal residence. The budget has to be a substantial rehabilitation expenditure, and the work must meet federal guidelines called the Secretary of Interior standards. So this idea that it has to be a certified historic building, it can be individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or a contributing building in a National Register Historic District, or in some communities, like Lake Bluff, local landmarks or buildings in local landmark districts have been approved to be able to receive the freeze. It's based on having a certain type of ordinance, and that those communities can also have local landmarks eligible for the program. The use, current or proposed, has to be owner-occupied housing, and that includes single family. It's also even apartment buildings up to a 6-flat, as long as one unit is owner-occupied, or it can be condos or cooperative buildings as well. The substantial rehabilitation criteria is that the owner must spend 25% of the assessor's fair market value or fair cash value of the property during a 24-month period. So what is that? What are those expenditures that count towards that 25%? Architectural and construction costs, most of those all count. And that means, structure, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, new roofs, all sorts of things like that all count. Some depreciable soft costs, architectural fees, or if you hire a consultant to shepherd you through the program, that would count too. The purchase price, however, does not count. New additions don't count. It has to be work on the historic building itself. And site work or landscaping does not count either. So this fair cash value on your assessor's website, it's here, it would be here under total market value, would be what you'd have to spend a quarter of. For example, this particular example is about $1.4 million, and they would have to spend about $350,000. That's over a 2-year period in the rehab. So it's not what if you just purchase the building, it's not what you paid for it, and it's not what someone tells you your house is worth. It's what the assessor says the property is worth. So those QREs, I mentioned they could be construction costs, even to a later existing addition, depreciable soft costs, survey, legal, architectural and engineering, but the acquisition, furnishings, new additions, landscape, and site improvements do not count towards that minimum expenditure. What's the timeline? Well, you basically have a 24-month window during which it can be a sliding window. You decide where you have your majority of expenditures. Some people work on their projects for many years, and so they say, when do we take those 24 months? And you can't go back more than 4 years ago to start your project. But you could start it today, as the slide shows right now, up until 2 years from now. Or you could go back a year, or go back 2 years, or even 3 or 4 years. That's the maximum that you could go back, but it's only 24 months of expenditures, and within that 24 months, you have to spend that quarter of the fair market value. And then finally, the work on the project must meet the Secretary of Interior standards and guidelines for rehabilitation. And I want to emphasize that's rehab standards, not restoration standards. So you could convert your carriage house, as in here, to a residence, as they've done here, and a very nice job as well, because the windows have been made shorter on the upper floor, they come back to the original height. They created new windows on the ground floor where the carriage doors, and I thought did a pretty creative job of making it look like a carriage house again, but a very functional residence. Now, these standards are defined by the National Park Service, and we review your project, even though the Park Service standards, we use them for all of our programs in our office. And it's important to know that our review is separate and could slightly vary from your any local review. For example, our review includes both the exterior and interior, both of the building. Or sometimes we might differ slightly on issues about windows from local commission reviews. So don't assume that you've already don't put off applying for the program and just get your local review and then come in and say your local commission approved it, so I'm in, right? And actually, you need to work with us and send your plans and specs to us, or have a consultant send them to us, and then we can let you know at that point if there's anything that needs to be tweaked to be able to meet the standards. So what do the standards say? Basically, they talk about preserving significant historic features of the building on both the exterior and interior. It doesn't require restoring a building or its features to their original appearance. If something's missing, you don't have to replace it. And later changes to the building may be significant. It doesn't have to be an original feature to be significant. If you had a building that was built in 1890 and that was modified beautifully in 1905, there may be a lot of the 1905 features that are significant as well. Don't think you have to rip everything full off just to go back to the original appearance. So those later changes could be significant. Most non-historic features can be removed or altered and such. It's the significant remaining historic features that we're going to be looking at. You can make new compatible alterations or additions, But once again, additions won't count towards meeting that minimum expenditure. So what are we looking at? What do we really care about in our review? Usually the emphasis is on primary facades, and often that's just street visible facades. Some buildings are really monumental and wonderful. Buildings have more than one facade. They might even have a facade facing the lake that might be a primary facade. But on the exterior, it's often the most public facades. Similarly, on the inside, it's often the most public spaces, such as the entrance hallway, the main stair hall, the living room, the dining room, or a library, any special rooms like that. And then there's more flexibility when you get to bathrooms, kitchens, within bedrooms upstairs. We usually just look at maybe the hallway in upstairs. But if there's a significant feature like a fireplace in a bedroom, we would still like to see that maintained. But it's not saying the entire building has to be frozen in time. We work with you to understand what would be the key features for presenting your building. But it kind of ties down to that public facades and more public, what we call the primary spaces and significant features. So you have lots of flexibility in less significant areas or on non-primary facades. This kitchen on the left is actually in a Franklin Wright house, but they completely changed it. Most kitchens and bathrooms have been changed many times before, and we like to give you some areas that you can have lots of flexibility with. Similarly, the back or non-primary facade of the building, if you want to put an addition or make changes, that would be the best place to locate those. You can also do additions. This is another example of a Frank Lloyd Wright house and in Oak Park, and you can see on the plan on the right, the large orange blob is the addition. It's almost double the size of the building. But because it's put to the back, you look here on the slide on the left, the image on the left, you don't even see the addition from the street. It has no impact on the historic building's facade, primary facade. So that was one that was approved for the tax freeze. So there's a three-part application process. So the first thing would be to contact us. You send the part 1 and 2 of our application in with 4 photographs of the building and drawings. We might request additional information. Then you complete the rehab as per your part 2 that we hopefully have approved. And then when you get done with the project, you send part 3 with the after photos and proof of expenditures to show that you met that minimum 25% of your fair market value. And upon approval, at the end of the project, we issue a certificate of rehabilitation and send a copy to you and to the assessor. So part 1 of the application is pretty clear. Is it historic? Is it on the National Register or in a National Register district? Or is it a municipality like Bluff with local landmarks and local districts approved for freeze? And I went online today. I was really impressed with this interactive map that you have in Lake Bluff, showing National Register landmarks and local landmarks and what's significant and contributing. I was very impressed with that. Part 2 is sort of the meat and potatoes of the application. And the part 2 is the description of the work. And we might ask for more information or within 45 days we'll either tell you if we need a little more information, clarify it, or we'll approve the project, or we might approve the project with conditions, like as long as this one thing is different from what you've got in your plans, you'll get the freeze when you're done. Or we might suggest alterations to your plans that hopefully would still meet your goals and your project goals, but also could meet the Secretary of Interior standards. And at that point, say if you have a project that's approved with conditions, or say you'd have to tweak your plans to be able to get approved, the owners can decide if they want to continue. It's a voluntary program. There's no obligation to apply. Basically, your home is your castle, as this one here was almost building. Your home is your castle. You want to be very, very happy with where you live. So if something that you're planning on doing doesn't appear to meet the Secretary of Interior standards, we'll probably suggest ways that maybe you could make the same goal and meet the standards. But you have to decide whether you would want to continue, and I like the fact that it's a voluntary program. And then when you're done, there's a request for approval of the completed work. And that basically comes with photographs of the end of the project, showing the work was done as it was approved in the part 2 of the application. It asks for other things like the cost, the square footage, and what the assessed value was for the year the work began. And you have to submit proof of expenditures to show you have spent that minimal amount. And that could be everything from canceled checks, credit card statements, and I say, please redact everything you don't want people to see on that. Your credit card number, we don't need to know, when you went to the beautician. All of that can be redacted out. All we're looking for are construction expenditures. Or if you're working with a bank loan or something like that, that's an easy way to show all that. Or paid bills or invoices that are paid from the contractor did, and GCA general contractor that work or contractor liens. Basically, that has to be entered on a spreadsheet showing what your expenditures were. There are also some people do some of their own work and want to include that, and there's a do-it-yourself labor form for those sorts of expenditures, and those can count too. So some people ask, can you fix up a building and then flip it to a new owner? Yes, you can, but it has to be carefully timed. The developer would fill out parts 1 and 2 of the application, make sure that the project will get approved when it's finally complete. After the rehab, the developer could sell the property with the thought that the new owner can get the freeze, but only if the buyer is the first owner occupant, and they must be the one to submit the final form of Part 3 and receive a certificate of rehab from our office. Otherwise, the freeze goes away with any sale. So I'm going to close with a few top tips. Number 1, don't replace your windows before you talk to us. Windows really can be really important facets to a building's appearance, as you can see here with the beautiful original multi-light windows and the aluminum ones that are replaced with here on the left. So whatever you do, order windows before you get your approval or start working with us on the application, or your consultant starts working with us on the application. We might say repair windows on primary facades rather than replace them if they're in good condition and they're historic. Top tip number 2, don't gut the building before you talk to us either. There might be something you think is really rubbish on the inside. We might say, but wait, please keep that tile floor in this room or something like that. And top tip number 3 is work with your own building's history. Remember, there might be non-original alterations like this beautiful vitrolite storefront on this earlier 1879 commercial building. And that is something that would be significant and worth preservation. You might have something like that involved with your house as well. A later porch that's just, really monumental and beautiful that contributes to the history of the building or something like along those lines. Top tip number 4, we always recommend you fill out parts 1 and 2 for an application and submit the plans before work begins. Because then we can guide you. If we see something that won't meet the standards, we can say, if you just change this one minor thing, you'll get the freeze when you're done. So that's sort of the tax freeze in a nutshell. And are we going to take questions now or at the very end?
Well, we can take some questions now. First thing I'd like to do, Carol, is thank you so much for your presentation. And you have really tickled my ego this evening because 2 of the houses that you showed in your examples are Stanley Anderson houses and are featured in my book that I did on Stanley Anderson and my dad's work. And so you have made my evening by showing the stairwell at the Mrs. Huntington Henry's house and showing the exterior of the Nikki Clow house on Mayflower. So I want to thank you for doing that for me. Are there any immediate questions on Carol's presentation? Seeing none, what I'd like to do is ask Jeff McGuire, who's one of our committee members, and his wife Maria is here in the audience, if they could just briefly talk about their process of going through the tax freeze. They bought a house in Lake Bluff that was landmarked, and when they began thinking about remodeling the house, it was suggested that they try this, and I'd like them to tell us what their experiences have been. So, Maria, if you'd like to, we don't have microphones this evening, so if you could just stand and speak loudly, that would be nice.
Okay, sure. Here, I'll just stand over here with Jeff so somebody has.
Come
everybody
here and
knows where to
stand
go.
on the camera.
I'll just sit over here. So Glenn, who was the village assistant administrator before Clara, suggested that I look into this. And the reason I found out about it even is because when we bought the house, we found out that it had been landmarked within the village. I went to the historic museum to try to find some information. Janet Nelson was really helpful. She might have said, oh, you should talk to Glenn. Because I said, what can I do? We want to remodel, but what are we allowed to do? You know, we'll talk to Glenn. And so he told me about this program. And when I looked into it, and I figured out that we would meet the basic constraints of the historic preservation, the amount of rehab dollar-wise that we were going to go into. I thought, well, I can do this. So what happened is that we were moving quicker than I thought on our renovation, and I needed to get this done quickly. I called Carol and asked her some questions. Darius, who I don't know if he still works for you, he was terrific.
Yes.
And and I asked some of the questions that she's already covered. And what was important is the exterior was the most important thing to the Historic Preservation Commission here in Lake Bluff. They wanted the exterior to remain as if untouched because of our little cottage being important for its time period, you know, or valuable to show something of the time period. So I looked at all the pages that had to be filled out. I took 150 photographs with a real camera because Carol asked me to. And I numbered each photo, and I had each photo with a sticker on the back that said the number, the address, what it was, and our name, I believe. And each one was then referenced in the application. Move exterior door to east-facing wall from a south-facing wall, and then it says photos number 1 through 6 and whatever. And then, or also please see photo number whatever on page 2 or whatever. I will say that because our renovation started really quickly and we were in a bit of a hurry, I called Carol later and said, look, these are things we're doing and we're in a bit of a hurry, and could you look at my application quickly because they're going to tear down a wall on Monday. And she said, wow. But I will say that because I had been careful, I had talked to them, I understood the standards before I began. The photographs were well organized, the application was well organized. We weren't asking for a lot. She was able to approve it really quickly. And I will say that advice would be to review the standards from the Secretary of the Interior, because you will get a general idea right there of what you can and can't do. The windows, I think, are a huge item that you may not be able to replace, that a lot of people would not understand. And it's not inexpensive to renovate a window. So I'm trying to think. The only thing she said we could not do is that, what was it?
Well, I was going to bring up the door.
The door? We moved a
I
door.
moved a door.
Oh, yes, we moved a
We
door.
moved a door on our porch, and we moved it where there had been a blank of a window, and we moved the door,
The front door.
the front door, and Carol asked us to leave the exterior looking like a door, even though it's not the door anymore on the other side, it's just a window. So that was the only real exterior accommodation that we had to make. There were windows, newer windows in there with grids, and we talked to her about that. We were going to remove those, and we talked about whether we could put grids in the new ones, and based on
The time period,
the
she
time
said
period,
no.
it said no. And so it actually, as it turned out, most of our windows didn't have grids, so it worked out for us. We put a couple new ones in just to kind of match.
Yeah, all those things work for us. We ended up renovating the old part of the house and the new part of the house that had been added on in about the year 2000. I did a FOIA request before I started doing all of this to the village. I got copies of that those architectural plans. I got a lot of information that was helpful. Because even though we were renovating parts that were not old, we wanted it to all flow together. You know, Carol said she really didn't mind what we did in other areas, but it really should all flow together. We wanted to change doors, so she told us you can pick from a 2-panel door or a 5-panel. And that's what we did. And we liked that. We really tried to keep the flavor with our bathrooms with hexagonal marble tile and you know, a lot of white fixtures. I was shocked to learn that a pretty bathtub could also count towards your renovation cost. And all those nice finishes can count. The one thing, I said, Carol, this whole first floor has these rosettes on every doorway and window. And you know what I'm talking about, those little bullseyes. I said, I don't think they're original to the house. And she said, oh no, somebody went through there and tarted it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, she speaks my language. That was such a relief to me. But
So there wasn't, I mean, we didn't have to really do a lot of things outside of our plan. That's one thing. The thing about the door is we had some 6-panel doors, and if we weren't going to change it, she didn't care whether we left it as a 6-panel door. But if we put a new door in, she wanted it to be a 5 or a 2.
everything we touched in the old part of the house, if we touched it, we had to make it accurate.
Right. So, again, we weren't really like forced into changing the 6 panels to 5-panel, but we did just to match, but we didn't really necessarily have to.
Every time something came up that I thought would affect what I had already sent her in terms of our plan, I checked with them, with her or Darius, to make sure that we were on the right track. I kept a list of notes of whenever I talked on the phone, so I had that on a sheet in case anything came up later. But like I said, we were lucky. It was a pretty straightforward renovation.
And other than the door, there wasn't a lot of exterior.
So it doesn't sound like this was a terribly arduous process.
It was not arduous. It was just getting photographs actually printed was the most, I think, the most arduous part. And putting stickers on them. But honestly, you had to be really organized. If one wall happened to become part of the room, another room that you wanted to talk about a feature that you were changing, you had to take that photograph twice. So you needed to take a photograph of all 4 walls and any important feature that you were changing and refer to that north, south, east, west. That's the other thing I was going to tell you. Yeah, really the photographs. Yes,
I'm sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead, Carol.
We accept digital photos now, even iPhone photos.
You know what? When I said in my part 3, I did give you digital photos.
These
Yeah.
days. So it's all a digital application these days. So there's no labeling the stickers on the back. You can just paste them all into a PowerPoint and label them, or paste them into a PDF and write your descriptions right there.
Oh, that's very easy.
Some
Anybody
things have gotten easier.
What a great modernization of that. Maria, I'd like to ask, one of the things that Carol talked about was filling out the forms number 1, 2, and 3, the pre-construction, the sort of the authorization to move forward and then the final approval of construction. I have gone through, in my Masters of Preservation classes, I have gone through the process of filling out all of those forms. And the first time you go through it can seem very detailed and very exacting and whatnot, but what was your experience in going through that documentation of proving up what you wanted to do, when you were going to do it, and then actually proving up that you did it? Was that difficult?
When I wrote part 2, which was the inclusion of the photographs with the room and what we want to do in this room, yes, it was. I wrote an extremely detailed description. For example, in the dining room, we will be removing the wallpaper from the ceiling that is stained. We will be replacing the light fixture with something, whatever. We will be threading in new wood flooring from another part of the. Sorry.
No, it's just bouncing.
It's just bounces.
Threading in new wood flooring that will be stained to match the older wood flooring. We will be removing this cabinet and replacing it with these that are recessed panels or whatever. It was really removing carpeting, replacing with wood that will be stained, really detailed. And I think because I was able to give all those details room by room, it made it a lot easier for them to approve everything.
So it just sounds like you just carefully went through the process.
I think I was in the zone.
So
Scared myself.
That's one of the things I'm intrigued about discussing, is that the process can seem daunting at first, but as you get into it, for the typical complexity of a construction project, it doesn't add that much extra work to doing a good, high-quality construction project.
Right.
I think that's the
No,
point
not
I'm
at all.
trying to make.
I will say another thing though, that when I was writing the second part requesting this, I would say we wanted to take down a wall between our dining room and our kitchen to expand to more of an open floor plan. It's a very small house. And I said, well, can you look at this? What do I write here? And I said, should I say we want to take down this wall? And he said, no, you should. Jeff said, you should say we're expanding the opening. So I tried to be really positive about, saying things that sounded really positive and good.
Okay. Well, great.
And again, we've talked about that. We got a lot of help from Carol and Gary and Maria. Talked to them multiple times, and they really helped us walk through the whole process.
They really did. They really will hold your hand if you need it.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
that testimony.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Are there any questions or any thoughts? Anybody have any comments about all of this? So, okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for that. Now we're going to move to sort of the final part of our presentations this evening. Jean Sylvester is here this evening in person. Carol, we hope you will stay for the rest of the program. Jean is here and is going to talk about the preservation from the consultant standpoint.
Where would you like me to stand?
Well, you can stand up here at the podium. It's probably the easiest thing to do for the camera and whatnot.
Hi, Carol.
So,
Hi, hi. And thank you, Maria, too.
Thank you.
all right. So let me read a little biography here of Jean. Jean is an architectural historian and associate with Benjamin Historic Consultants. Benjamin Historic Consultants has done a tremendous amount of work for documenting properties in Lake Bluff, both in doing surveys and in individual properties. Jean joined Susan Benjamin in 2018 after graduating from the School of the Art Institute Historic Preservation Program. At that time, she was a practicing attorney. Jean has completed several historic architectural surveys, including one in Lake Bluff, historic and architectural impact studies, historic resource evaluations, Illinois tax freeze applications, what we're talking about this evening, and National Register nominations, which she is going to talk about in just a minute. She is the author of The Beaux-Arts Boys of Chicago, an architectural genealogy from
1890 to 1930, for the journal Class Assist, published by the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art. Jean is also the chair of the Architectural Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission for the Village of Long Grove. And so, Jean, we appreciate your being here this evening, and could you tell us a little bit about the process from your aspect?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. And I am very grateful to Steve Kraus and the Commission and the Village of Lake Bluff for putting this program together and for showing or demonstrating such a commitment to historic preservation. I would love to do this in Long Grove to encourage preservation there. Will you forward the slide? Okay, could you, next slide, please?
Yep.
So this is our firm. Maybe we should turn the volume a little.
Do you want to read that, Lauren? The only problem is then Carol won't be able to hear.
Can you just turn it down a little bit? Or can you move it away from her? Away from
This is Benjamin Historic Certifications. Susan Benjamin is our fearless leader. She practiced architectural history and historic preservation for honestly more years than she would ever admit, or like me to reveal, writing well over 175 local landmark and National Register nominations for individual buildings and multi-property districts, as well as preparing probably thousands of tax freeze and federal income tax credit applications. Susan was the first chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission in Highland Park, where she lives. She frequently consults on historic preservation projects, lectures, writes articles, and several books, including one most relevant here, North Shore Chicago Houses of the Lakefront Suburbs. And I can honestly say that no person or firm has more experience on the North Shore of Chicago than Susan does. So next slide, please. So the first, the largest projects I think that Susan has done here that has made the most impact, and where we begin researching to prepare for a National Register nomination of local landmark, is through the use of surveys. Susan has completed, or her firm has completed 4 surveys, the first of which was in 1998, where she surveyed Lawman Avenue, the Lake Bluff Camp Meeting Association area, and then 13 selected scattered sites. And these sites were chosen in consultation with the Historic Preservation Commission, I believe, and the History Museum, which used to be called the Bleed Center. Those sites were the Philip D. Armour House, otherwise known as Hangley Oaks, William Kelly House, Stonebridge on Green Bay Road, the Commonwealth Edison facility, which I'm sure you all know, the Ben Close House on Maple, a couple on Moffett Road, Lake Bluff School, Crabtree Farm, and some others on Washington Avenue. Next slide. The second survey was done in 2003, and that was the southeast survey area bounded by North Avenue and East Sheridan Road, then Sheridan Road and the lakefront on the east. Next slide, please. This was her third survey, which were the estate areas. Most of the large estates and remaining mansions and outbuildings are along Moffett Road, North Sheridan Road, east side of Sheridan Road, past the business district, north to Shore Acres Country Club. The Shore Acres estate area, and the area that runs along Green Bay Road. And then finally, this was the survey that I participated in, and this was literally surveying everything in Lake Bluff that had not been surveyed before, which was honestly one of the most fascinating things I've ever done, and Steve Krause was very involved in that. And one of the reasons why this was done was because, generally speaking, buildings are considered historic if they're 50 years or older, which now throws us into the mid-century time period. So if you look at the photograph on the left, that's Janet Nelson's house with her son, I believe, in front. And part of the story of Lake Bluff the story of Lake Bluff doesn't begin and end with the Camp Meeting Association. It now includes the suburbanization of the village after World War II. And so we did pick up remaining areas, but we also went ahead and intensively surveyed the terraces, which were developed right after the war. And then we also did what's known as a windshield survey of other areas that were built after that time period, including like Armor Woods, Belforay, Signacourt, and Tangley Oaks. And then we also did a few commercial buildings in there as well. And all of the buildings that we did, which I think were, I don't know, 1,200 buildings or something, were considered for eligibility on the National Register and as local landmarks. Next slide, please. This was the survey area and all of the neighborhoods that were surveyed. And it really showed just a wealth of resources, a variety of architectural styles, just really the most comprehensive and vast assemblage of buildings that I've ever really done in one particular survey. But we really did sort of emphasize and take a good, careful, close look at the mid-century buildings. Next slide, please. So Benjamin Historic Certifications also does National Register nominations. There are a handful of individual National Register properties in Lake Bluff, and Benjamin Historic Certifications prepared the nomination form for the William McCormick Blair House, which is part of the Crabtree Farm estate. Next slide, please. The Carolyn Morse Ely House, which again is also part of the larger estate property. And the John Griffith Store building, which I believe was expanded to be part of the district, if I'm not mistaken. That was listed in 2003.
It's the anchor for the district.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, the Howard and Lucy Lynn House, which was placed on the register in 2005. In terms of individual landmarks, or individual landmark properties in Lake Bluff, BHC did a nomination for Claire Haven on Center Avenue. Next slide, please. And we are in the process of working on one for 125 East Center Avenue, which was the home of James Hobbs, which is probably a familiar name to most of you, and his wife, Mary Marilla Hobbs, who were very involved in the Camp Meeting Association and notably the orphanage that was here. So we thank the owner for that. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the boring stuff, but the, and you don't really need to read through it, but the criteria for landmark designation is very clearly spelled out in the ordinance. It's significant character as part of the basically the history or the architectural characteristics of the village, or you could expand it further to the state or the United States. And when they say feature, that means that can be the building or a part of the building, but for most purposes, it's the building. So that's for historic significance. We also analyze for, it would be certified for architectural significance if for more of a design feature. Next slide, please. And, oh, sorry, the first was the general considerations. Then there's architectural significance and historic significance. So those would be mostly to the village, occasionally to the state of Illinois or to the United States. Again, you don't have to read all of this. This is very clearly laid out on the village website. And it is a landmark nomination form that you fill out online. You step by step, and it's extremely easy, basically. It's very simple to go through. Next slide, please. So there's the form, and it's, I guess, is it interactive? Is that the term? Anyway, you just fill it out right online. We tend to do a little bit of a deeper dive. I was given examples from the village of some of these applications that were filled out by individual property owners, and it was great. And they did what they needed to do, and it was landmark. Our firm does a little bit of a deeper dive for a number of reasons. One, we have always viewed the building as the client, and the history of the village is so important that we feel that we are putting together a thorough and a deep, well-researched body of work that will ultimately be available to anyone who wants to read it, for the History Center, for the village, for the Historic Preservation Commission. And it really is amazing the information that comes out when you start to dig through and how interconnected it all is. Lake Bluff is a very small town, and it's very interesting to read how interconnected everything is. So this is the criteria you fill out. You check off the box of what considerations you believe is appropriate, and then for architectural significance and historic significance. You can briefly explain that, but we submit a separate narrative for that. So when we go about researching a nomination here, I agree that the website that the village has put together and that the History Center has put together is really unbelievably resourceful and impressive. This is the first page of the historic preservation section on the village website. And this is that survey that you saw. You can type in an address, it'll find it, you can click on it, and then the results of our surveys are on that. Or landmark nominations, or there's a sort of like a wealth of information that is accessible right through here. So it's important for us we start there. But one thing that is that comes out is that we not only build a case that this particular building is eligible for listing on the register or a local landmark because of its own significance, we have to build the case of its context and how that building fits within the history of the village or the state or for a number of reasons. And so this is what's very helpful because you can look at the address and then you can start to look around it and see what other buildings were built, when they were built, by whom, that kind of thing, and you begin to get a greater understanding of really the wealth of, not just the wealth of information that's out there, but a real feel for what occurred when all of this was happening and when changes were being made to these buildings. Next slide, please. So I just pulled up an example of 700 East Avenue that you could find on the first page. You click on the address and then you see the historic survey and all of the information there, and all of those blue highlighted lines are links to other information, so it's a really great resource. We always research historic maps, and these are just a random sampling of historic maps that we used when we were writing about the history of the village itself. There are a number of maps out there. You can learn the growth and subdivision of the area, annexations, all of these things, zoning. It's all available and very informative. Next slide, please. Now we dig into historic photographs. There's a wonderful, wonderful resource for Lake County aerial maps that's available online, and then there are a lot of images of Lake Bluff that are available through the History Center, or History Museum, excuse me. Also, we use the Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Histories. I think that's the History Center for these. Next slide, please. Historic newspapers are a fabulous way to find out information about individual people, individual addresses, the village history, because so much of it has been digitized now that there's just, it's like you can literally pinpoint when a building was being built, who built it, who were the neighbors. Another really fabulous resource. Next slide, please. We look at books. I'm sorry that I didn't include your book here, Paul. We look at that one too. The Lake Bluff book is fabulous. There's the North Shore book there, and then we use other books written about particular architects just to get a deeper understanding and for our narratives. Next slide, please. The Lake Bluff History Museum is one of the best resources for information. They have a great website. You can pull a lot of this off of the website, and I did that for these, but also Lindy Jensen is fabulous and very, very helpful. This is a picture at the bottom left of James Hobbs and his wife. And they have digitized information. They also have archival information, and they have real estate listings, which are very, very helpful to gauge changes made to buildings. When you look at a building you have to assess it for integrity, and integrity means if any changes were made to the building that may have removed historic features or, hopefully not. Slide, please. And so, the last thing I will say is, like I said before, that Lake Bluff isn't confined to the camp meeting grounds. When we worked on the last survey, we just found some just fabulous stuff. This is a real estate ad, and a couple of them for the new developments after World War II. So you can get a lot of information from just random sources. The one on the right was a brochure that the Chicago Construction Company put out when they were selling plans for homes. And so these were from the terraces, and we went door to door and found examples of these homes that had not been changed. And we would not have known that if we had not found this brochure. Next slide, please. Here's another great example. The Lesser Our House, obviously beautiful home, amazing architect, but this house achieved more significance, like what Carol was saying, not just the time it was built or by the first owners. This was cast, a movie was filmed here, and that is part of the house's history also. So we really try to layer everything in to show not just the house, but the changes to the house, the changes to the village, and it all contributes to the history of it. Next slide, please. This was one of my favorites. This was the Bath and Tennis Club, which is no longer extant, but these were in Sports Illustrated in 1963. I mean, they're just amazing. And the Lake Bluff History Museum had them. Next slide, please. And like I said, we did go further. We went up to Tangley Oaks, which was built, I think, in the 1990s. Again, we found some, or the History Museum had brochures from Tangley Oaks when it was built, and so we knew the models. And we did find, the street where the first models were all built. And so you can look at something like that, not today, because it really wouldn't be eligible for listing, but 50 years after they were built, that little street, if those models are still there and still intact and have great integrity, may be eligible someday. And this is the last slide I have. This was just a photograph that the Mariani Landscape Company had. That was an old grain gizmo. I don't know what it was. But they decided to keep it, and they adaptively reused it and is now part of their headquarters, which I think is just a great example of a company reusing something historic, not taking it down, but preserving something that was a historic part of the village and then changing it. And the change and their use of it today, again, is part of the history of that building. So I really commend homeowners who choose to put their homes on the register or landmark them, because they're preserving it, not just for themselves, but they're preserving it for their children and their grandchildren and the history of the village. Lake Bluff would not be what it is today if some of these historic buildings were torn down. There are so many suburbs that have no protection and don't offer these incentives, and things are getting torn down every day. And these suburbs are not far from here. But I think you really lose the character of a place when you allow that. And so I not only commend the homeowners, I also commend the village for coming up with these incentives. I think it's just a phenomenal way of accomplishing both goals. Appeasing the homeowners, providing some assistance, and preserving the integrity and the history of the village. So, next slide, please. And that's it. So thank you very much for having me.
Sharon, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd be happy to answer any questions if you'd like. I have done many tax freeze projects. like the ones that Maria and Jeff did along with Carol. And I will say that the SHPO is wonderful to work with, and it's a better project when it is collaboratively done with the homeowner and with the SHPO.
Great, great. So, Jean, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your wonderful comments about the historic preservation process and what we're trying to do here in Lake Bluff. So we appreciate your consultant's vote of confidence. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts about any of this? Okay, so we're sort of at the end of our presentations here, and so we have an opportunity for some questions and answers. If there's anybody in the audience who has any ideas or wants some clarifications. We've gone over just a ton of material this evening, but I think there's been an awful lot of very interesting things that we've talked about. Carol Dyson's commentary on the tax freeze, I think, was very illuminating. And Jean, thank you so much for your piece. And we hope we're going to get a lot more traffic with all of our incentives, Clara, that you described. So, any thoughts from anybody? Any great ideas, recommendations? Yes.
So if someone was interested in beginning to look at having their home landmarked and pursuing getting some of the incentives or the tax freezes, what would be a first step? What would they do?
There's a couple of first steps.
Okay.
The first would be go to the Lake Bluff History Museum website and try Googling your address. You might have to putter around a little bit on their website. You're dealing with doing the research. Go and visit the museum and talk to them. What do they know? The other is to call the village, call up our number one person, Clara, here, and she can begin talking about the process. So you sort of have to go in two different directions at once. What's the process? And is my house significant? And so most people who buy a home in Lake Bluff pretty quickly get a sense of whether their home is significant. They can, you sort of get, the realtors will clue you in, the neighbors will clue you in, so you'll get a sense of that. The other piece, as Jean pointed out, and as Carol pointed out, is to come look at the Lake Bluff website, the Choose Lake Bluff site. If you just simply dial in your address and put the cursor on the address, it'll pop up a great deal of the initial information about the house. So that would be where you'd start. And then from there, there's sort of a groundswell of people who will come and help assist you in going through the process. So, and we're hoping to encourage more people to do this. If you sit down with a pencil and paper and tally up waiving building fees and putting a freeze on your taxes and going through all of this process, you can pencil up a surprisingly large number in relation to the value of your house. A quarter, a third of the value of your house all comes back to you in either tax incentives or in discounts or in waived fees. It's a tremendous amount of money and something that you can take advantage of immediately. One of the things that historic preservation does over time is it improves, it either stabilizes or it improves the value of a neighborhood. One of the principal reasons for historic preservation is to stabilize, first to stabilize, and then second, increase the value of your neighborhood. But that's the long-term appreciation that you have to look for in your house. So you preserve your house and you live in it for 20 years and then take that appreciation out of it. We hope that through historic preservation, that appreciation is higher than if you had not been in a historic neighborhood. What these incentives do is help drive those dollars into your pocket while you're in the house and while you're in the process of living there. So that's part of what we're trying to do in changing the sort of the aspect of how preservation functions in Lake Bluff. So that's kind of I think the program. There are plenty of cookies, and we can break for a few minutes and have a cookie break and whatnot, if people would like to do that. And then we'd like to do that. Okay. Well, now let's take a couple minute break and talk to some of the people in our audience and find out what they have to say. And we'll come back and reconvene the meeting in a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to reconvene our meeting, and we're going to do it for just a minute here. I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I wanted to quickly get your comments. What did you think about our program this evening? Did you find it educational, interesting?
Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
Great comments. Yeah, I thought it was excellent, covered all the areas, very interesting. I like the change of speakers.
Good, all right.
And I loved Carol's presentation and her approach. You know, she lays out if your objective and her objective are aligned, the process is going to be very collaborative. And I think that was powerful. And that you have the ability to go as far as you want to go. And if you get to the end and there's not alignment, you can make a choice. And so you're empowered. And I also like that if you were doing something and there was the third step, if there was a transition in ownership, that third step could be done by the next owner.
That was interesting.
Yep. So that's helpful.
I think there's an awful lot of very good information there that needs to just be gone through and whatnot.
But a great resource.
Surprisingly, a lot of what she was talking about is what Jan and I have been taking in our Masters of Preservation classes. And so when she started talking about QREs, qualified expenditures and whatnot, we slaved away through that process in our class on a commercial basis. So I think it was a great program. I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to thank Clara, and I want to have a shout out to Lauren also for all of your help.
Yes.
Both of you were absolutely great in putting it together. And the cookies, the Highland Park HPC serves cookies at their meetings. And so when we were setting this up, I mentioned that, and both of them glommed onto the idea, well, sure, why don't we have a couple of cookies? So we don't have very many meetings, but maybe we'll make the cookies part of our part of the process. So I don't have much of a report beyond that. Claire, you don't have? Do you have any comments? What are your thoughts?
I think it went very well. I think we had some technical difficulties, but aside from that, it'll be nice to have this presentation being recorded and something that can be pointed to if people have questions or just kind of want a nice overview. So we will have that available on our website, and it can definitely be yet another resource for kind of something to use if somebody says, why should I landmark my property, or tell me about that process. So.
But I'm hoping the audio, the video comes through on this. Always worried about the technology.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments? Any thoughts? Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
In a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Hearing none, our meeting